Welcome back to the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast, a weekly podcast that looks at the history and background information of some of the best video games of all time. This week's episode takes us back to 1994, during the 16-bit era of the console wars. Sega Genesis versus Super Nintendo. Neck and neck. Sonic versus Mario, but Nintendo had a little trick up its sleeve. It brought back one of its original characters from its initial launch in Donkey Kong. And they put him in an adventure called Donkey Kong Country. And that is our Week 3 episode game. Let's jump right into it. Donkey Kong Country is a 1994 platform game developed by Rare and published by Nintendo for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It is a reboot of Nintendo's Donkey Kong franchise and follows the gorilla Donkey Kong and his nephew Diddy Kong as they set out to recover their stolen banana hoard from the crocodile King K. Rool and his army, the Kremlins. The single-player traverse 40 side-scrolling levels as they jump between platforms and avoid obstacles. They collect items, ride minecarts and animals, defeat enemies and bosses, and find secret bonus stages. In multiplayer modes, two players work cooperatively or race each other. After developing Nintendo Entertainment System games in the 1980s, Rare, a British studio founded by Tim and Chris Stamper, purchased Silicon Graphics workstations to render 3D models. Nintendo sought a game to compete with Sega's Aladdin and commissioned Rare to revive the dormant Donkey Kong franchise. Rare assembled 12 developers to work on Donkey Kong Country over 18 months. Donkey Kong Country was inspired by the Super Mario series and was one of the first home console games to feature pre-rendered graphics achieved through a compression technique that converted 3D models into SNES sprites with little loss of detail. It was the first Donkey Kong game neither produced nor directed by the series creator Shigeru Miyamoto, though he contributed design ideas. Following its announcement at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1994, Donkey Kong Country was highly anticipated and backed by a major marketing campaign that cost $16 million in America alone. It was released in November 1994 to acclaim. Critics hailed its visual as groundbreaking and praised its gameplay and music. Its quality and design were favorable compared to the Super Mario series. Donkey Kong Country received several year-end accolades and set the record for the fastest-selling video game at that time. With 9.3 million copies sold worldwide, it is the third best-selling SNES game and the best-selling Donkey Kong game. Following its success, Nintendo purchased a large minority stake in Rare, which became a prominent second-party developer for Nintendo during the late 1990s. Donkey Kong Country re-established Donkey Kong as a popular Nintendo franchise and is credited for helping Nintendo win the console war of the 90s and maintaining the SNES's popularity into the fifth generation of video game consoles. It is considered one of the greatest video games of all time and has been ported to platforms such as the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and digital distribution services. Rare followed it with two sequels for the Super Nintendo, Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy Kong's Quest in 1995, and Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble in 1996, and the Nintendo 64 game Donkey Kong 64. After a hiatus during which Rare was acquired by the Nintendo competitor Microsoft, Retro Studios revived the series with Donkey Kong Country Returns in 2010 for the Wii, and the Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze 2014 for the Wii U. Information about the gameplay. Donkey Kong Country is a side-scrolling platform game, a reboot of the Donkey Kong franchise. Its story begins when King K. Rool and his army of crocodiles, the Kremlins, steal the Kong's banana hoard. The gorilla Donkey Kong and his nephew Diddy Kong set out to reclaim the hoard and defeat the Kremlins. Donkey and Diddy serve as the player characters for the single-player game. They run alongside each other and the player can swap between them at will. Donkey is stronger and can defeat enemies more easily. Diddy is faster and more agile. Both can walk, run, jump, pick up, and throw objects and roll. Donkey can slap the terrain to defeat enemies or find items. The player begins at a world map that tracks their progress and provides access to the 40 levels. The player attempts to complete each level while traversing the environment, jumping between platforms, and avoiding enemy and inanimate objects. Level themes include jungles, underwater reefs, caves, mines, mountains, and factories. Some feature unique game mechanics such as rideable minecarts, blasting out of cans resembling barrels, and swinging ropes. Each area ends with a boss fight with a large enemy. Donkey and Diddy can defeat enemies by jumping on, rolling into, or throwing barrels at them. If hit by an obstacle, one of the Kongs runs off, and the player automatically takes control of the other. They will only be able to control that Kong unless they free the other Kong from a barrel. In certain levels, a player can free an animal that provides the Kongs with special abilities, similar to Yoshi from the Super Mario series. Buddies include Rambi, a rhino that can charge into enemies and find hidden entrances, and Garde, a swordfish that can defeat enemies with its bill, Squawks, a parrot that carries a lantern, Espresso, an ostrich that flies, and Winky, a frog that can jump high. Each level contains collectible bananas, letters that spell out Kong balloons, and animal tokens. These items can be found within the main level or by discovering hidden bonus stages where they are earned via solving puzzles. The player starts with 5 lives. Collecting 100 bananas, all the Kong letters, a balloon, or 3 of the same original animal token grants extra lives. The player can visit other members of the Kong family for the world map. Funky Kong operates a flight service allowing the player to travel across different areas of Donkey Kong Island. Cranky Kong, the aged incarnation of Donkey Kong from the original Donkey Kong, provides tips and fourth wall breaking humor, and Candy Kong saves the player's progress. The player can increase their completion percentage by finding bonus stages. Reaching the maximum 101% results in a different ending. The game also features 2 multiplayer game modes. In the competitive contest mode, players take turns playing each level as quickly as possible. In the cooperative team mode, they play as a tag team. In 1985, the British game developers Tim and Chris Stamper established Rare Limited. Some background information here about Rare in the game. The brothers previously founded the British computer company studio Ultimate Play the Game, and founded Rare to focus on the burgeoning Japanese console market. After Nintendo rejected their efforts to form a partnership in 1983, Chris Stamper studied the Nintendo Entertainment System hardware for 6 months. Rare demonstrated it was possible to reverse engineer the NES and showed several tech demos to Nintendo executive Minoru Arakawa. Impressed, Arakawa granted Rare a Nintendo developer license. Rare developed more than 60 NES games including the Battletoads series and ports of games such as Marble Madness. When Nintendo released their next console, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, in 1991, Rare decided to limit their output. Around 1992, Rare invested their NES profit into Silicon Graphics Inc. Challenge workstations with Elias rendering software to render 3D models. It was a significant risk as each workstation cost £80,000. The move made Rare the most technologically advanced UK developer and situated them high in the international market. Conception of the game. Though they had purchased the workstations to produce games for the Nintendo 64, which was in development at the time, Rare discovered it was possible to use them with the 16-bit SNES. Rare tested the SGI technology with Battletoads Arcade and began developing a boxing game, Brute Force, using Power Animator. Around this time, Nintendo was embroiled in a console war with Sega, whose Mega Drive competed with the SNES. Nintendo wanted a game to compete with Sega's Aladdin, which featured graphics by Disney animators, when Nintendo America chairman Howard Lincoln learned of Rare's SGI experiments during a trip to Europe. After impressing Nintendo with a demonstration of Brute Force, Tim Stamper, inspired by Mortal Kombat's use of digitized footage in place of hand-drawn art, suggested developing a platform game that used pre-rendered graphics. Nintendo granted the Stampers permission to use the Donkey Kong intellectual property. The franchise had been largely dormant since the unsuccessful Donkey Kong 3 of 1983, so Nintendo figured that licensing it posed minimal risk. Some sources indicated that Stampers obtained the license after Nintendo offered them to their colleagues of characters, and they chose Donkey Kong. Conversely, the lead designer Greg Mayles recalled that it was Nintendo that requested a Donkey Kong game. According to Mayles, Nintendo codenamed the project Country, based on Rare's location in Twycross, leading to the title Donkey Kong Country. Rare assembled a team of 12, the largest in their history at that point, and development began. Nintendo was skeptical of Rare's approach to graphics, concerned it would make the game unplayable. Early in development, Mayles and other developers presented a demo to Nintendo staff in Japan. One in attendance, the Game Boy creator Gunpei Yokoi, felt the game, quote, looked too 3D, but Mayles said Donkey Kong's creator Shigeru Miyamoto was supportive and gave Rare his approval. Donkey Kong Country was the first Donkey Kong game that was neither directed nor produced by Miyamoto, who was working on Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Miyamoto was still involved with the project, and Rare said he provided critical input. Nintendo is usually highly productive of their intellectual properties, but was relatively uninvolved with Donkey Kong Country, leaving most of their work to Rare. Programmer Brendan Gunn noted that Stampers worked to shield the team from outside influence. Rare spent 18 months developing Donkey Kong Country from an initial concept to a finished game, and according to project manager Dan Osen, 20 people worked on it in total. It cost an estimated US $1 million to produce, and Rare said it had been the most man-hours ever invested in a video game at that time, 22 years. The team worked 12 to 16 hours every day of the week. Gunn said that the team was under significant pressure from the Stampers and to finish the game in time for Thanksgiving due to Nintendo's competition with Sega. A little bit about the design. Rare drew inspiration from the Super Mario series, Males citing Super Mario Bros. 3 as the primary influence on the level design. Males wanted to make a game that was accessible but would flow seamlessly for a skilled player. As such, objects were placed so well timed players could continually move through a level. Males know that although the concept of speedrunning did not exist at the time, the way the game was designed definitely supports it. The team designed levels using post-it notes. They would conceive a set piece such as the swinging ropes, create every variation they could think of, drew them on post-it notes, and pieced them together. Rare featured barrels as the primary game mechanic to pay homage to the original arcade game, and included hidden collectibles like coins and balloons to add depth. Diddy Kong originated from Rare's search for a game mechanic akin to Super Mario's power-up system in that he would serve as a player's health. Males said, "We thought a second character could perform this function, look visually impressive, and give the player a feeling that they were not alone." Donkey Kong Country did not have much scrapped content. Gunn said he only regretted that Donkey Kong walks across dotted lines instead of paths on the world map, which could not be implemented due to time constraints. One scrapped idea, a collectible that would evade the player by running or hiding, serves as the basis for the Jinjos in Rare's subsequent game, Banjo-Kazooie of 1998. Reviewing Donkey Kong Country for release, Nintendo directed Rare to reduce the difficulty to appeal to a broad audience, reasoning that the secrets would provide sufficient challenge for hardcore gamers. At this point, Miyamoto made some last-minute suggestions such as Donkey Kong's Terrain Slap that were incorporated. Nintendo's Kensuke Tanuba flew to Tycross to localize the game with Rare. Some information about the characters. Kevin Bayliss was in charge of redesigning Donkey Kong. He wanted a character that looked believable and could perform animations like pounding his chest. His initial design was blocky and muscular to make Donkey Kong easy to animate, but it became more cartoonish when Nintendo faxed reference material. Some of Bayliss's designs were in the style of his Battletoads work, and the final designed eyes came from those of the Battletoads. Miyamoto provided some suggestions, including the red tie, but left the design specifics to Bayliss. Because Donkey Kong did not have much of an established universe, Rare was free to expand it with new characters. Males conceived Diddy as a redesign of Donkey Kong Jr. Unlike the original Donkey Kong Jr., Rare did not want Diddy to share his build with Donkey Kong, so they based him on a spider monkey and made him agile to give him distinct moves. Nintendo considered the redesign too great a departure and asked it be reworked or presented as a new character. Males felt the redesign suited the upgraded Donkey Kong universe, so he chose to make it a new character. Naming the character was a challenge, and Rare dropped their preferred Dinky Kong due to legal problems. I can see why. Rare staff spent hours at the nearby Twycross Zoo recording gorillas for reference, which they described as, quote, a complete waste of time. They found their movements unsuitable for a fast game and their noises too quiet to be captured by a microphone, so they based Donkey Kong's running animation on a horse's gallop and had programmer Mark Betteridge provide Donkey and Diddy's voice clips. Rare positioned Cranky Kong as the original Donkey Kong character from the arcade game, but avoided mentioning this in the game and marketing materials out of fear that Nintendo would disapprove of the idea. Though it was mentioned in the instruction manual. The antagonists, the Kremlings, were recycled from a cancelled Rare game. Rare's initial story was extensive and spanned 15 pages, but Nintendo had it condensed to fit into an instruction manual. Some information about graphics. Donkey Kong Country is one of the first games for a mainstream home video game console to use pre-rendered 3D graphics, a technique used in the earlier 1993 Finnish game Stardust for the Amiga. Rare developed a compression technique that allowed the team to incorporate more detail and animation for each sprite for a given memory footprint, which better preserved the pre-rendered graphics. Nintendo and Rare called the technique Advanced Computer Modeling, or ACM. Rare briefly feared competition from DMA Design's Uniracers, which also featured pre-rendered graphics, but the staff was relieved upon learning that the player character was Uniracer's only element that was pre-rendered. The artists began by modeling the characters and nerves using Power Animator and adding textures. They then created the animations and rendered them frame by frame before compressing them for the game. The AMC process was handled by a design computer that had a proprietary utility similar to Deluxe Paint. Adapting to the cutting-edge SCGI workstations was difficult. Greg Mayall's brother Steve said they had a steep learning curve. The game was Rare's first to require multiple programmers, and they worked with little guidance. To help, Nintendo provided Rare with research material regarding apes, barrels, and caves. The pre-rendered graphics allowed for variety and detail uncommon at the time, and Tim Stamper constantly pushed the team to go further and incorporate weather and light effects. The ACM process pushed the SNES hardware to its limits. Betteridge said Rare wanted to do everything they could with the hardware similar to what they had done with the NES game Battletoads. A single SGI screen took up more memory than an entire SNES cartridge, and Greg Mayall described transferring the backgrounds into the game by splitting them into tiles as, quote, the bane of their project. Models took hours to render, so the team would leave the computers running overnight. Sometimes artists would shut down other artists' computers in the middle of the process so they could render their own models. The SGI machines required a massive air conditioning unit to prevent overheating, while the team worked in the summer heat without relief. Programmer Chris Sutherland was responsible for implementing the graphics and found reducing the characters' frames of animation challenging. Some information about music of the game. David Wise composed most of the soundtrack. Wise initially worked as a freelancer and assumed his music would be replaced by a Japanese composer because of the importance of Donkey Kong to Nintendo. Rare asked Wise to record 3 jungle demo tunes that were merged to become the DK Island Swing, the first level's track. Wise was subsequently offered the job to produce the final score. Before composing, Wise was shown the graphics and given an opportunity to play the level that would appear in, which gave him a sense of the music he would compose. He then chose samples and optimized the music to work on the SNES's SP700 sound chip. Wise worked separately from the team in a former cattle shed, visited occasionally by Tim Stamper. Donkey Kong Country features atmospheric music that mixes natural environmental sounds with prominent melodic and percussive accompaniments. Its soundtrack attempts to evoke the environments and include music from levels set in African-inspired jungles, caverns, ocean reefs, frozen landscapes, and industrial factories. Wise cited Koji Kondo's music for the Super Mario and Legend of Zelda games, Tim and Jeff Fallin's music for Plok, synthesizer film soundtracks released in the early 1980s, and rock and dance music from the same decade as influences, and wanted to imitate the sound of the Kong Wave Station synthesizer. Wise wanted to compose in the style of the 1940s jazz, but was restricted by the SP700's limitations. He used, quote, a lot of small samples and made the soundtrack very synthesized to work around them. Since Donkey Kong Country featured advanced pre-rendered graphics, Wise wanted to push the limits in terms of audio to create equally impressive music and make the most of the small space he was working with. Aquatic Ambience, the music that plays in the underwater levels, took 5 weeks to compose. Wise considers the track his favorite and the game's biggest technological accomplishment in regards to the audio. I kind of have to agree with him. That's one of my favorite songs in the game as well. K. Rool's theme was influenced by the work of Iron Maiden. For the title screen theme, Wise remixed Nintendo's original Donkey Kong theme to demonstrate how Donkey Kong had evolved since his debut. Wise said his primary focus was to make the most of the SP700, and he input the music by hand to save memory. He noted the process was easier than composing for the NES due to a larger number of sound channels. Eveline Novkovic contributed 7 tracks, including the World Map theme, as her first SNES project. Novkovic was inexperienced with the SNES hardware, and Wise helped teach her as they worked together. She attempted to provide the levels a sense of purpose and drew inspiration from field composers like Alan Silvestri and Klaus Doldinger. Funky Kong's theme was originally written by Robin Beanland. According to Beanland, the track was intended for an internal progress video about another Rare game, Killer Instinct, before Nintendo decided to use it in a Donkey Kong Country promotional trailer. Beanland said Tim Stamper liked it and wanted it included in the game, so Wise adopted it. Marketing of the game. Lincoln unveiled Donkey Kong Country at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, which took place from the 23rd to the 25th of June in 1994. The unveiling was the finale of Nintendo's conference and did not reveal that Donkey Kong Country was an SNES game until the end of the presentation, fooling the audience into believing it was for the upcoming Nintendo 64. Greg Mayles recalled the audience was stunned in silence before bursting into applause. As one of the flagship games in Nintendo's Play It Loud promotion, Donkey Kong Country was backed by an exceptionally large marketing campaign, Marketing Blitzkrieg, as Hardcore Gaming 101 put it. According to the Los Angeles Times, Nintendo spent $16 million on marketing Donkey Kong Country in America alone. At that time, major games typically had an average marketing budget of $5 million. Marketing materials emphasized the revolutionary graphics, often noting that Rare's SGI workstations had been used to create the Jurassic Park film Dinosaurs from 1993, and positioned Donkey Kong Country as a direct competitor to Sega's Mega CD and 32X platforms to remind players it was not for the next generation hardware. Nintendo sent out a promotional VHS tape, Donkey Kong Country Exposed, to subscribers of the magazine Nintendo Power. I actually got a copy of that. I was a subscriber to Nintendo Power at the time. Exposed, hosted by comedian Josh Wolf, provides a behind-the-scenes glimpse of the Treehouse, the Nintendo America division where games are tested. Nintendo World Report wrote that Exposed was probably the first time most people outside of Nintendo learned about the Treehouse, and the promotion allowed players to see the game for themselves at home, rather than having to learn about it secondhand from a magazine. Exposed also features gameplay tips and interviews with localizers, playtesters, and Tim Stamper. In October of 1994, Nintendo America held an online promotional campaign through the internet service CompuServe. The campaign included 2 downloadable video samples of the game, a trivia contest in which 800 people participated, and an hour-long online chat conference attended by 80 people, in which Lincoln Arakawa and Vice President of Marketing Peter Main answered questions. Nintendo's CompuServe promotion marked an early instance of a major video game company using the internet to promote its products. Nintendo gave away Donkey Kong t-shirts as pre-order bonus, and partnered with Kellogg's for a promotional campaign in which the packaging for Kellogg's breakfast cereals featured the Donkey Kong Country character art and announced a prize giveaway. The campaign ran from November of 1994 to April of 1995. Fleetwood Publications published a promotional comic in the UK in 1995. A soundtrack CD, DK Jams, was released via news media and retailers in November of 1994, with a standalone release in 1995. It was one of the earliest video game soundtrack albums released in the United States. A promotional, competition-oriented version of Donkey Kong Country was sold through Blockbuster Video. Its changes include a time limit for playable levels and a scoring system which had been used in Nintendo Power Fest 1994 and Blockbuster World Video Game Championship 2 competitions. It was later distributed in limited quantities through Nintendo Power. The competition version of Donkey Kong Country is the rarest licensed SNES game. Only 2,500 cartridges are known to exist. By October of 1994, Nintendo was still in fierce competition with Sega and its popular Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Donkey Kong Country was released a month after Sonic & Knuckles for the Mega Drive. The Los Angeles Times characterized the coinciding releases as a battle. Both featured company mascots, boasted Hollywood-sized marketing budgets, and advertised revolutionary technological advances. Lock-on technology for Sonic & Knuckles, and 3D rendered graphics for Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country was highly anticipated. Hardcore Gaming 101 wrote, "It was everywhere. You couldn't escape it. It was on the cover of every magazine. It was on gigantic, imposing displays and marquees at Walmart and Babbage's. For kids of the era, November 20th seemed like the eve of a revolution." The exposed VHS tape contributed significantly to the hype. Donkey Kong Country was expected to gross at least $140 million in the United States if it matched sales projections. Nintendo anticipated that it would sell 2 million copies in a month, an expectation that Main acknowledged was unprecedented but was based on the off-chart reactions we've received from the game players and retailers. US Gamer noted that Nintendo at the time of Donkey Kong Country's release faced difficulty to keep the SNES profitable. The 5th generation of video game consoles was on the horizon. The 2-bit prowess of the Sony's PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, far exceeding the SNES's capabilities. The Nintendo 64 was not due for release until 1996, so Donkey Kong Country, wrote US Gamer, served as Nintendo's bluff to make it seem that the SNES could hold its ground against next-generation hardware. Donkey Kong Country was released worldwide in November of 1994, 2 weeks ahead of schedule and around the Black Friday shopping season. It was released in the UK on November 18th, in North America on the 21st, in Europe on November 24th, and in Japan on November 26th. In Japan, the game was released under the title Super Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong Country set the record for the fastest selling video game at that time. It sold over 500,000 copies within a week, and sales reached 1 million copies in the US alone in the 2 weeks. In its second week on sale in the US, the game grossed $15 million, outpacing the week's highest grossing film, The Santa Claus, which was $11.5 million, and album, Miracles, the holiday album, which was $5.2 million. In the UK, it was the top-selling SNES game in November 1994. Donkey Kong Country sold 6 million copies worldwide in its first holiday season, grossing $400 million in worldwide sales revenue. Cumulative sales reached 9.3 million copies. Based on available sales figures, it is the third best-selling SNES game and the best-selling Donkey Kong game. We'll give you some gameplay footage now, and we'll close up the podcast. Enjoy the video. And that'll bring episode 3 of the Classic and Current Gaming podcast to a close. We do this each and every week. We highlight a different video game and give you all the history and background information that you crave and what you like to see. We have the visual video with it too as well, just for an overall presentation. See the game, learn about the game, try to make it as educational as we can. Be sure and check out all our other content over here on YouTube. We have gameplay videos. We have the weekly podcast like you've seen today. And we also have a monthly Hall of Fame broadcast. We'll do each month. We'll induct several games into a Hall of Fame, which I would love to own. And just give you some background information about those games as well. If you're into live content, you can check us out over on Twitch. We're at twitch.tv/Classic and Current Gaming. We do live streams most mornings, so you can catch us over there for some live stuff. That's it for today and this week. It's been RX322 from Classic and Current Gaming signing out. Keep on gaming. See you on the next stream. Be good to each other. We'll have another episode of the podcast coming up next week for you. And everybody have a great day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. All information provided in the podcast brought to you by Wikipedia.